The year is 2020, and Netflix has just won an Emmy. Not for The Crown, not for Stranger Things, not for a moody true crime docuseries narrated by a brooding British voice. No, this one's for Puppets. The award, Outstanding Children's Program. The recipient, The Dark Crystal Age of Resistance, a sprawling, handcrafted epic prequel to Jim Henson's cult 1982 fantasy film. A series that looked like it had been yanked out of the 1980s, airbrushed with magic, and dropped into the middle of a modern streaming war. It had everything. A $60+ million project, over 100 painstakingly animated puppets, voice actors like Taron Egerton, Anna Taylor-Joy, Mark Hamill, 12 species of mythical creatures that made CGI look like a cheap party trick.
Oh, very ew.
And lore, so much lore. But the celebration didn't last long. Just one day after winning an Emmy, Netflix quietly, unceremoniously, and without warning, canceled it. No final season, no resolution, no warning to fans. Just silence. The studio didn't even release a statement right away. Instead, the news trickled out like a leak no one wanted to fix. And within hours, fans were already asking the question no one at Netflix seemed to want to answer.
But why? Why would you do that? Why would you do any of that?
Why would you kill your most beautiful fantasy series at its peak? To figure that out, we need to go back to where it all started. Before the puppets, before the backlash, before the pivot to mass appeal. Back to a time when Netflix was still pretending to care about art. To understand the Dark Crystal Age of Resistance, you have to understand just how insane it was that it even got made. The year is 2017. Netflix is flying high. Stranger Things is a cultural moment. House of Cards hasn't collapsed under scandal yet. The company is churning out originals like there's no tomorrow. And somewhere deep inside the Jim Henson Company, yes, the Muppets guys, a pitch is taking shape. Not a reboot, not a spin-off, a prequel to The Dark Crystal. The original 1982 film was weird, niche, and unapologetically unsettling. A grim fantasy fable with 0 human characters and 100% puppets. It terrified children, it confused adults, it flopped at the box office. But it gained a following, a loyal, extremely online following. So when the idea of Age of Resistance was announced, that fan base lit up. Reddit threads filled with speculation. Concept art trended on Tumblr. Puppet nerds came out of the woodwork. Netflix said yes. And then they said yes to everything. Full puppetry, no CGI shortcuts. An original score, 75 full-scale sets, over 80 puppeteers, and a 10-episode arc that would serve as a fully canon backstory to the 1982 film. This wasn't just a nostalgia play, this was an art piece disguised as television. In a world of green screens and cheap digital doubles, the Dark Crystal Age of Resistance felt like it was handcrafted by mythologists.
I'm assuming you crafted this with your own hands.
And it wasn't just fans who noticed. Critics fell in love. The series dropped on August 30th, 2019. Rotten Tomatoes gave it an 89%. Rolling Stone called it one of the most stunning fantasy shows ever created. Fans, they called it something else. A miracle.
It's a miracle! A Thanksgiving miracle!
It was unlike anything on TV. And maybe, just maybe, that was the problem. Because the bigger it got, the more expensive it became. And the more expensive it became, the less Netflix seemed willing to keep it alive. By late 2019, the Dark Crystal Age of Resistance had done the unthinkable.
Unthinkable.
It took puppets, literal cloth and foam, and made them feel more alive than most CGI blockbusters. It proved you could still make high fantasy without drowning everything in blue screens and VFX sludge. Netflix had poured somewhere between $60 and $100 million into the project. Depending on who you ask, it was one of the most expensive fantasy series ever produced at the time, right up there with early Game of Thrones. But here's the catch. Unlike Game of Thrones, the Dark Crystal wasn't built for mass appeal. It was slow, dense, philosophical. It didn't hold your hand, it handed you a map written in Elvish and told you to keep up.
Try to keep up.
And Netflix doesn't do niche. Not anymore. This was around the same time they were shifting gears. Internal metrics were king. Completion rates, rewatch value, viewer retention, and above all, scalability. Netflix's content strategy had become very algorithmic. Cheap to make, easy to localize, broad enough to play well in Texas and Thailand.
สวัสดีครับ
Yes สวัสดีครับ
สวัสดีค่ะ
Greenlight it. If it took too long to binge, if it didn't spark TikTok trends, if it didn't inspire a sea of Funko Pops, kill it. So despite the Emmy, despite the fandom, despite the sheer artistry involved, Netflix ran the numbers, and the Dark Crystal didn't fit. But here's the kicker. Instead of reworking the release strategy, instead of trimming budget or going seasonal, they did nothing.
They did nothing! Nothing!
They let the creators develop season 2 concepts in silence. Let the cast give hopeful interviews. Let the fans think it was coming. And then ghosted. It's not that the Dark Crystal failed. It's that Netflix didn't even give it a chance to succeed. Meanwhile, other projects were getting full-blown franchise treatments. They poured hundreds of millions into The Gray Man, signed off on another 7 seasons of Big Malp, doubled down on YA dramas, reality shows, and yes, cuties.
Hell no. No.
But we'll get to that. By the time fans started asking, where's season 2, it was already too late. Behind the scenes, the cracks were showing. The problem wasn't the story, it wasn't even the viewership. Though Netflix will tell you otherwise, the problem was something much simpler. Math. The kind of math only a streaming executive could love. You see, Netflix doesn't just measure success in viewership. They measure it in cost per finished hour, subscriber acquisition efficiency, and something called projected lifetime value of a series IP. Translation, if your show doesn't bring in enough new subscribers, or keep them glued for dozens of hours, it's not worth it. Even if it wins awards, even if critics call it a masterpiece, even if you just sunk tens of millions into the most ambitious puppetry production since Jim Henson was alive. Because puppets don't sell merch like superheroes, and gelflings don't dance on TikTok. There were warning signs, subtle ones. In early 2020, internal murmurs hinted at budget concerns. Some of the crew contracts weren't renewed. No marketing push, no teaser posters. Just eerie silence. Then COVID hit. Suddenly anything expensive became radioactive. Netflix slashed animation budgets, paused big practical productions, renewed cheap unscripted shows by the dozen. And the Dark Crystal quietly filed under too risky, too weird, too slow. Netflix never officially announced the cancellation. They didn't even give the creators a heads up. One of the lead puppeteers found out through a tweet. The fans? They found out the way you find out your ex is dating again. Not from them, from a stranger. The show was gone, just like that. Now, here's where things get weird. While the Dark Crystal was being quietly buried, Netflix wasn't pulling back. They were doubling down. But not on storytelling, on content. Suddenly, it felt like Netflix was greenlighting everything except what fans actually wanted. Big Malp, an animated sex comedy about hormonal teenagers, got renewed again and again and again. At the time of this recording, it's had more seasons than Breaking Bad, The Sopranos, and The Dark Crystal combined. Then came Cuties, a French indie film Netflix picked up and turned into a full-blown PR disaster. The marketing alone sparked outrage, accusations of child exploitation, petitions to cancel Netflix subscriptions, and even a lawsuit in Texas. Netflix's response? Not to pull the film, not to apologize, but to double down. They reworded the blurb, toned down the poster, and insisted that critics just didn't get it. Meanwhile, the Dark Crystal fans, still begging for a conclusion, still rewatching episodes, still sending handwritten letters to Netflix's Burbank office. And then, as if on cue, came The Electric State, a $320 million sci-fi epic directed by the Russo brothers, based on a moody Swedish art book with, no joke, Mr. Peanut as the main character. It was everything Netflix wanted the Dark Crystal to be. Star-studded, CGI-heavy, big, loud, algorithm-approved. Except it was also bad. Critics called it hollow. Fans called it unwatchable. One reviewer called it a 2-hour demo reel of what happens when you let AI storyboard your childhood. But unlike the Dark Crystal, The Electric State got the red carpet, a marketing blitz, a companion podcast, and even a real-life robot built for press interviews. You couldn't make this up. Netflix didn't just abandon its most artistically ambitious fantasy series, it replaced it with marketing noise. So when did it all come crashing down? There was no press release, no farewell message, no thank you to the fans. Just a single sentence buried in a press interview. There are no current plans for a second season of the Dark Crystal Age of Resistance. Boom. That was it. For a show that took 5 years to make, for a universe crafted with the obsessive detail of a Tolkien novel, gone, with less ceremony than a canceled sitcom. Fans were furious. Reddit lit up with posts titled, "Why would Netflix do this?" and "Dark Crystal deserved better." One user wrote, "They'll keep pumping out garbage like Big Malp, but cancel the only thing that made me believe in Netflix again." Another posted a meme of a Skeksis holding a Netflix logo and screaming profit. It wasn't subtle, but it was accurate. And then came the Rotten Tomatoes bombshell. While The Dark Crystal held an 88% critic score and a 94% audience score, Netflix's big shiny new projects were bombing. Cuties sat at 14% audience score. The Electric State dropped like a lead balloon on release week. Even The Gray Man, their previous $200 million swing, got called soulless, forgettable, and Amazon Prime Core. But Netflix didn't care, because the views were there. They weren't in the business of art anymore, they were in the business of retention metrics. Watch time, autoplay, global appeal. And in that equation, The Dark Crystal, with its puppets, its slow pace, its high production costs, was a rounding error. It didn't trend, it didn't meme, it didn't scale. So it died. Here's the wildest part. After killing The Dark Crystal, Netflix acted like nothing happened. They never addressed the cancellation in a blog post. They never gave the creators a chance to say goodbye. They just moved on. New thumbnails, new top 10 charts, new autoplay previews screaming at you the moment you open the app. The Dark Crystal was buried under a pile of dating shows and stand-up specials before its animatronics had even cooled. Louis Leterrier, the series director, later gave interviews where he sounded heartbroken. He said they had plans for multiple seasons. They'd storyboarded battles, character arcs, a finale that would have brought everything full circle with the 1982 film. But Netflix never even let them finish the story. Meanwhile, their press team was busy celebrating the success of The Floor is Lava. Yes, the floor is lava. The fans tried to rally, petitions were launched, hashtags trended, even an organized letter-writing campaign made headlines for a day. Netflix never responded. Instead, they renewed Big Mouth for yet another season, promoted cuties on the homepage twice, and funneled more cash into sci-fi VFX extravaganzas with no soul, no lore, and no audience connection. It wasn't just a pivot, it was a purge. And when asked about it in investor calls, Netflix brushed it off. Said they were focused on scalable global IP. Said that not every show finds its audience. Said that content decisions are data-driven. Translation, if it doesn't fit the algorithm, it doesn't matter. So what exactly did we lose when Netflix canceled The Dark Crystal Age of Resistance? We lost more than a fantasy series. We lost a small miracle of storytelling. We lost proof that practical effects could still outshine CGI. We lost the rare kind of world building that doesn't explain itself, but invites you in anyway. We lost risk. We lost craftsmanship. We lost weirdness. We lost the kind of art that doesn't test well with focus groups. The kind that doesn't trend on TikTok, but sticks with you for years. The kind that feels like it was made by people, not metrics. Netflix didn't just kill a show, it killed trust. It told creators that ambition doesn't matter. That even if you pour your heart into something, even if it wins awards and builds a loyal fan base, even if it pushes the boundaries of what TV can be, none of that counts if you don't spike their data dashboard. And maybe that's the most dystopian thing of all, because The Dark Crystal wasn't supposed to be perfect. It was supposed to be meaningful. It was supposed to prove that art still had a place in streaming, that you could still do something bold and imaginative and get rewarded for it. Instead, what we got was a message loud and clear. If your story costs too much, takes too long, or isn't easily memed, then it's not worth telling. And yet, people are still watching, still sharing fan art, still hoping, even now, that maybe, just maybe, someone else will pick it up. Because sometimes the algorithm isn't everything. Sometimes what matters is what stays with you. And for millions of viewers, The Dark Crystal Age of Resistance, even unfinished, is still more alive than half the shows that survived. Cue the credits, but leave the story unfinished, because that's exactly how Netflix left it.